Life science investments. How does that work and why is that important? My name is Chris and I'm working in the life science industry since 2006. Until 2020, I always had problems to explain to people what I'm doing because almost nobody was interested in anything that has to do anything with life science early stage investments. But that changed. In January, February, March, Q1 2020, a novel virus appeared on the scene, SARS-CoV-2. And the disease this virus causes is COVID-19. And I'm pretty sure in July 2020, everybody is familiar with this viral threat. And with this viral threat, almost 8 billion people from one day to the other became interested in life science investments. But how does it work? What's necessary to bring a novel scientific idea into a product that at the end of the day becomes a therapeutic, medical device or vaccine that helps preventing the spread of SARS-CoV-2 and its disease COVID-19. Most of the time, more than 10 years and almost 2 billion euros per vaccine or therapeutic that hits the market. To give a little bit more insight, I had the idea to gather investors and have an online webinar and chat about life science investments. In this podcast episode, you will hear one of Austria's most famous life science entrepreneurs, Andreas Grassauer, who invented the company Marinomed and got it from a greenfield operation listed on the Austrian stock market. After his keynote speech, you will have the opportunity to listen to the world's best life science investors and learn from them how they handle life science investments. Enjoy the podcast episode, and if you want to learn more about investments in life science, join our Life Science Get Together network and get updated and informed about anything that's going on in the life science field in this world. Have a great time, stay safe, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to the Life Science Get Together number 12 today with an online webinar about life science investments. In the last couple of months, I got more and more questions about, should I invest in life science? How does that work? I have a novel project against SARS-CoV-2. Where do I get the funding from? The questions, I believe, are mostly driven by the current situation that we see worldwide with the novel coronavirus and its disease, COVID-19. And I thought to myself, how can I do it better instead of answering loads of mails and calls one by one? Is there any option that I can improve the communication? I thought to myself, why not ask the professional in a digital online webinar, record it and publish it on the LSG2G podcast. And so here we are. I'm extremely happy to have Andreas Grassauer as a keynote speaker. He's one of Austria's most experienced life science entrepreneurs and brought a company from a greenfield operation up to the stock market. He will have the keynote and tell us a little bit more about his success stories. Afterwards, we have a great panel with the world's most experienced life science investors. Andreas, please start with the keynote and tell us more about your experience in raising funds.
Thanks a lot, Christian. And just could you raise a hand that if you can hear me? Okay, fine, thank you. So telling the story and also being part of this community that is developing countermeasures for this SARS coronavirus 2 COVID-19 disease. Christian asked me to share the story about Marinomed, and it was back in 2000, beginning of the 2000s, mid of 2000s, we started to crystallize the idea to Marinomed, and at that time we were just through this SARS-1 epidemic that was obviously stopped with around 8,000 patients in the world. And as you just heard it, we are a listed company in the Austrian stock market. I jump over this disclaimer and jump right into that slide, who we are and what Marinomed is doing. And back in 2005, we found the evidence that the polymer from red seaweed certainly is able to bind to certain viruses. Later on, we called that product Carragellose, established a platform with several seed rounds and early investment rounds. We brought the company, developed the product, validated it in the clinics. And from that on, we developed the company, did a big pharma partnership back in 2010, and thought, okay, that's what you want to achieve with a startup. And then it turned out that not everything is done when you have a big pharma partnership, and certainly you need also a motivated partner that helps you to bring the product into the market. That was obviously not the case. The company went on in a difficult situation, and moreover, later on we discovered another platform, did another discovery back in 2014-15, and it was clear that we're gonna need money, but I'll come to that in a moment. So what we are doing, on the one hand, we have this broadband virus blocking polymer, and if you ask yourself the question, does it work against coronaviruses? Yes, it works against coronaviruses, at least to the known ones, the ones we knew before SARS-CoV-2. We don't have data to the new virus so far, but you can imagine that we were working on that, and we'll come out with data as soon as we have. And the Marinosolve platform, which is shown here, is basically a technology that helps to solubilize otherwise insoluble compounds. And that's pretty important because there's a couple of insoluble compounds out there. And we solubilized for the beginning a nasal corticosteroid, brought it through the clinics, did a pivotal phase 3 trial. Now we're in the registration with that product. All that is done with an asset-light business model. Practically all expensive step of the or capital-intensive steps of the pharmaceutical chains are outsourced, like production and marketing, distribution. We do the innovation. We develop the product, develop also the clinical pipeline, and of course we hold the patent and the IP. So basically a life science biotech business model, and that is done with a strong and experienced management team. Most of them have either experience in big pharma or in investment banking. I'm the only exception. I was always an entrepreneur, never worked for big pharma. That's somehow, then also come back to that in a moment. So that's the pipeline you see here, what we're currently doing. We're developing a virus blocking inhalation product. That's a product that is designed for inhalation in patients with viral respiratory infections of the lung. So no matter what the cause is, includes, of course, it includes SARS-CoV-2 patients, but also includes flu or whatsoever patients. So this is going to be a broadband virus blocking product, and we are currently entering the safety trials for that, and then I'll launch a proof of concept trial later in summer, beginning of autumn. So I jump over from that and come back to the situation back in 2015, where we talk about financing and not so much about the company. So At that time, we had, after I told you this big pharma partnership, it was difficult to get progress in the company. And with an asset deal in 2014, we secured the company in a pretty challenging situation. So that's one option of financing. If you have an asset that is not core of your business, you can sell this asset. That pretty much helped us. In our case, it was an eye product that we sold to the French stock listed company Nycox, and that gave us the resources to work on. But it was also clear when we want to develop our Marinosolve platform, we're gonna need additional financial resources to fund those platforms. So we're discussing around separating the companies, get different funds into different companies, sell off parts or the entire part, and then decided, okay, we want to continue the entire company because of the team. Because the success of this Marinosolve platform would allow the development of a series of products, not just only one. It could be an engine of developing new products, doing lifecycle management for existing products, or enable other products. And then from the management side, there was the commitment to grow the business with the entire company and validate the new Marinosolve platform. On the other hand, having investors on board since quite some time, our seed investor invested back in 2006. There was a clear request for a roadmap for the company. If we continue, they want to see what we're going to do, where's the direction, and of course, a continuous question that you will always get during this process is what is the exit for the investor? At the moment when the investor invests, you have to consider always the exit for the investor as well, because it's at the end of the day, they're investors. So, and here's what we did then. Back in 2015, in autumn, we did an investment round with an Austrian growth fund that helped us to secure the funds to get the Marinosolve platform in progress. And the Invest AG, which is also an Austrian growth fund, helped us to with additional funds. On the one hand, they helped to leverage the investment of the AWS Mittelstandsfonds, and also they bought out the former CFO of the company, who had bought the shares of this shareholder, and that pretty much also cleaned up the shareholder basis in progress into the direction of the company. So that all led to the conversion into a share company. We have been a limited company until 2017, and then our investment bank, the Erste Group Bank, came up with the idea to do a convertible bond which was listed at the Vienna Stock Exchange. And at that time, we had already talks with them. I think the first talk with them was back in 2009. So from time to time, we somehow met, initiated discussions whether it's time or not, what is the best financial instrument for the company. And during those early phases, the bankers gave us good advices also how to develop the company. And it's a good thing to listen to them. And one of the things they told us 2009, okay guys, it's too early. You're not ready for the capital markets. You need to develop the company further. That's what we did then later. And in this convertible bond was a good training for the management. And it's first time you write the prospectus, you get your reporting duties upgraded, You get to structure decision processes in the company and so on. And within 1.5 years, after that we were ready for an IPO, and in parallel we worked on the investment with the European Investment Bank, and both together worked in the beginning of 2019 when we did the IPO on the one hand and the loan from the European Investment Bank all together. And the proceeds from the IPO, which was 22.4 million, doesn't seem too big in an international capital market transaction, but with the loan of the investment bank and the convertible bond together, which converted at a very good rate for those investors, was a very, very good success for the company and gave us the funds to grow the company to that stage where it is today. And the one thing which is also shown here, the IPO is not an exit for investors. The exit, if there is the possibility to do so, comes later on. At the IPO, the IPO was an investment event. Also for most of the investors invested in the IPO, and only later on in October and 2019 and in January, they were able to exit parts of their investment via accelerated book billing procedures. And that was approximately 21 million that were changed here. And that pretty much helped also to get a little bit more free float of the company, and pretty much 1 year after the IPO, all the lockups are gone, with the exception of the management. Management has committed itself to keep the shares at least for 3 years. That's something uncommon for US investors. In Europe, I'm not aware that somebody did 3 years. For me, it was not an issue because I won't sell shares anyway. So it was not a big deal. But the message here is the IPO is not the exit. The exit comes afterwards if the company runs well. So better to prepare that the company runs well during the IPO. So what are the key learnings and from all those years and the takeaways for those listening? First of all, a diverse and a committed team is key. So if you have identified gaps early and manage those gaps in the management team. In our case, an early CFO left. He had some shares. You have to manage that. If this is not managed, you will not get the boat going. And of course, all investment rounds are costly and require management attention. That's true for private rounds, that's true for public rounds, and that's true for an IPO, which certainly will take practically the entire management attention for quite some time. And not only because you have to write the prospectus, because you have to deal with lawyers and new rules you haven't been involved before. But you also have to deal with new investors, and you have to understand the needs of these investors. So there is a specific life science investors, there's generalists, there is others, there's private investors, and you have to understand these needs. If you have an investor in your company who needs an early exit within a year, and you have others who don't need this exit, you probably run into problems. And so aligning the interests of these investors or of these shareholders is pretty important, because you won't only have investors as shareholders, you'll probably have founders who have different interests, and aligning those interests can help. And in my experience, the direction that the company goes public was pretty helpful. It's like a carrot, everybody's running afterwards. And at the end of the day, it aligns the interests of shareholders. And of course, equity capital markets are not a constant. They are not. They will not follow the plan. So there can be a pandemic ruining your stock plans. There can be a financial crisis or simply a war in the region, and the stock market is down, and you can't do your IPO. You need to have a plan B, possibly a plan C. In our case, we worked pretty tough with the European Investment Bank and also private investors. So probably if we wouldn't have been doing the IPO at that point in time, probably it would have ended up in a trade sale of the company. And as mentioned earlier, the early talks with the investment banks and the investors will help you. You certainly learn something from that, but don't talk only with one. Talk with more of them, certainly meet them, or you don't need them to meet every 3 months, but every couple of half a year or a year, why not? Yeah. And also you will learn that not all advisors out there will be helpful. That may include myself, that may include others. Be careful. This is not everybody works in the interest of your company. You have to understand the interests and the reasons why those people are talking to you. And after having told you all that, your product and your technology is key. This is the pretty important thing. If you can push this forward and this really works, it's going to be incredibly important for your success and the success of the company. And not the location of the stock market. Just share one experience when I was talking with a huge investment fund at the JP Morgan conference in San Francisco, where one said, okay, you guys, you simply don't think any minute where you get your company listed. Just think of the investors. Why the reason as an investor, why should I buy your share and not other share? Because I can buy thousands of shares in the entire planet. What is the reason I should buy your share and not the share of another company? And if you cannot answer the question properly, I'm not gonna buy it, no matter whether it's listed on the Nasdaq or somewhere in Europe. And then add to that buy and sell those shares. And the only reason I buy your share today is because it's gonna have more value tomorrow. So otherwise I won't buy. And if you cannot explain that story, it's gonna be difficult. And so the story has to be clear, and the story must be aligned around your product and your technology. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. And having said that, I'm gonna handle over back to Christian and the panelists. And thank you for your attention. And of course, I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andreas, for this interesting talk. We have the opportunity to ask questions also to Andreas. If in the audience anybody has a question, please raise your hands or type the question in the Q&A tool. And one question from my end to you, Andreas, in your opinion, what's the most important advantage for you when you are listed on the stock market with your company?
So the most important experience or the difference today is that internationally in a global world, it's quite common that tech companies like ours are listed. So we are better recognized in our business with our business partners. The transparency of doing that business is pretty well perceived, and the reputation you get from that this is the helpful thing for the business. The second thing is it aligns the interest of investors, and for me as a CEO and co-founder, even though the founders and management just only have a 25%, we're pretty much in the lead and can steer where the company goes.
Thank you very much. So let's jump then on the other side of the negotiation table. We have heard now the situation from the entrepreneur side. And now let's see in the panel discussion how the investors think, what they think, what's important to them, and what's needed to be attractive to an investor. We have the opportunity today to chat with 4 investors and a representative of the Austrian stock market. And I'm looking forward to this nice and interesting group. Let's start with one of the most unique funds that I've ever heard of. It's a US-based fund. Its name is Roivant. And I welcome today Sara Núñez Garcia from Switzerland. Hello, Sara. Can you please tell us a little bit more about you and your fund?
Yes, glad to do that, Chris. And thank you very much for the invitation. So Roivant, as you rightly said, so is originated in the US about 6 years ago. It's actually structured as a company, not as a fund. And there are reasons for that. So Vivek Ramaswamy raised in the last 6 years about 3 billion at the company level to start investing. One of the reasons why Vivek did not want to make this a closed-end fund is because of the investment thesis that we have. We go in early, usually at the company formation, inception of the company, and we try to go as far as possible with our invested companies. That means possibly profitability. So we're thinking about 10, 15 years from incepting the company. VCs, they have their 10+2 usually. I think for us, for our shareholders, was important not just to see the proof of concept in our companies, but also to push them as far as possible through the commercialization to profitability. So that's why in the beginning, the management team decided to structure Roivant as an open-ended investor fund as opposed to a VC closed-end fund. So we are therapeutic area agnostic, modality agnostic. In the last 6 years, we constructed a 21 portfolio, company across, different, therapeutic indications, and we progressed those along the way. And again, the idea is always, to go all the way. But again, if, say, the right pharma partner comes along, then, we're ready to transact. And this is what happened last year. In December last year, one of pharma partners approached us, and they were interested in acquiring a number of companies in our portfolio. And again, it is pretty public that Roivant takes companies all the way, and does that usually on its own. So Roivant has raised so much capital that typically we do not syndicate. It's, most of the times Roivant is the only investor in our companies, especially in the beginning, pre-IPO, and obviously as we take the company public, we let other investors in. So even though we have that model, and most of the people knew about the model, we were approached by a pharma partner last year, Sumitomo, was interested in acquiring a number of companies, the pre-commercial companies in our portfolio. And we looked at each other, and even though we were not looking for an exit for those companies, it proved to be the right acquirer, the right partner to commercialize the products in those companies. So we ended up transacting. So we sold 5 portfolio companies for about 3 billion upfront cash to Sumitomo. And now, post Sumitomo, we're thinking about what is the next generation of companies that we're going to build. We're thinking about, again, therapeutic area agnostic. The companies we'll be investing in will probably be earlier stage than we have in the past. In the past, we were thinking about validated assets with proof of concept at least or beyond. In this next generation of Roivant, we're probably going to go preclinical stage, early clinical stage, with a lot of de-risking to do platform companies. So this is what we're thinking as the next generation of companies that we want to build.
Thank you very much, Sara. It's amazing that you to have you here today. Let's continue with a brief introduction. Astrid, you are a Nobel Fund operating in the blockchain industry, and also you are very experienced in the life science industry. Tell us a little bit more about your approach.
Yes, so we're Untitled Ventures. We're based in Europe, and we invest in blockchain and related technologies because we share the vision of Web3, which means a decentralized, verifiable, and more secure internet technology, whereas blockchain is one of its back-end technologies to achieve that. I myself, I'm head of research and the managing partner of Untitled Ventures, so it's my job to basically set a strategy on how we screen investment opportunities and how we can best support them after investment. We're a fund that is basically looking at mostly ventures that are at the pre-seed stage up to Series A. In some very rare occasions, we will also look at Series B. In Fund 1, we have invested mostly in infrastructure layer projects, but we believe that in the next few years, these will be improved and there's nothing really fundamentally new that will come actually out of that corner. So we're looking now in the future to invest more into application that drives actually users of these kind of infrastructures. And there we have a number of sectors, one of which is healthcare that we're actually actively looking at. We don't invest strictly in gaming or gambling or anything in the financial sector like payments, because we just think that's actually very boring and overcrowded in any case. And we basically, what I should also say is we're quite agnostic to the kind of instrument that we're investing. So it can be equity, it can be convertible note, it can also be a token instrument. We haven't done any security token investments so far. And I'm not quite sure that we will ever do in the foreseeable futures until a few things are solved around that sphere. But we really look at it at the whole package and see like, okay, where is actually the value accruing in a company and where would it make best sense to actually acquire this kind of asset class, so to say, and then serve our investors best with that.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I think we should have a separate podcast episode talking about blockchain technology and its application in life science. Let's look across the Great Pond into the Boston area. What's going on there? Welcome to our panel, Christopher De Souza. I hope I spell your name correctly. Can you tell us a little bit more about your approach?
Happy to, and thanks for the invitation, Christian. Good to be on this panel of here. So we're Boston-based. We're a philanthropic venture firm, so that might seem to be a little contradictory, but let me explain. So the reason we are philanthropic is, well, the reason we're venture is because we make investments, period. We take an equity stake in a company, and like any other VC or investor, we make an investment and we're quite active with the company. The reason we're philanthropic is because unlike a venture fund, we have a single LP, and that LP is a family foundation out of Paris. And when they sold their business, which happened to be linen and uniform rental, they put all the money into a family trust that was dedicated towards advancing medical sciences. They've been funding academic research now, a very prestigious grant called the Transatlantic Networks of Excellence, over 400 million given out in grant money. And while that gets great publications, it doesn't necessarily get to the patients. So thereby was the genesis of Broadview. We come in and we invest early to help companies translate and cross the valley of death, or that gap over there, because everyone wants data, but before they give money, and you can't get the data unless you have the money. So we come in early with about $1 million per company, help them get across the valley of death and raise their next round. We're also philanthropic because we're very mission-based. So we only invest in cardiovascular, and that includes metabolic type 2 diabetes, dyslipidemia, stroke, obesity, and as you probably heard from the COVID virus situation, these are all comorbidities that impact other aspects of health. So we invest in cardiovascular, metabolic, and stroke. That said, we're agnostic to technology. So we do drugs, we do devices, we do diagnostics, we do regenerative medicine, as long as it's within this space. And the one thing that we look at the very first thing that we look at is what is the impact potential? And I don't mean numerical impact, I mean more clinical impact. So we've invested in, small indications where just a few people, but if we have a therapy of that could have a huge impact on their lives versus, the big heart failure, AFib, these are the very big markets. And so we come in, we make the investments. We've been in existence since 2010. We've made, I believe, 44 or 45 investments to date, a couple of really good exits, obviously a couple of write-downs. And we see about 400 plus 450 proposals a year. We make 3 or 4 investments. So just for all of you entrepreneurs in the audience, this is, I think, raising money is very difficult because you have a lot of competition out of that. That said, we are not your traditional fund, so we're not a 10-year fund. We just have a budget, and the family covers the operating expenses and gives us enough money to make 4 or 5 investments a year. But we have been successful. So how do we measure success? First and foremost, how much money have we leveraged? So for every dollar that we've invested, our portfolio now has raised, I think, a little over than $13 for every dollar that we've invested. So we're leveraging a tremendous amount of money. And when we first started, we would just do $1 million note. Now we have the credibility and sort of being seen as the go-to cardiovascular investor. In fact, there are 2 instances recently where companies heard that Broadview had endorsed and was getting ready to make an investment, and they came in and wanted to take over the entire company. People hear about Broadview's interest. That means you must be pretty good. It's sort of an endorsement because that's all we do, cardiovascular. The second return is ROM, not ROI, which is return on mission. How many patients are our portfolio companies impacting? Of course, that's a much longer term metric, but the leverage is a much shorter term. And I think our success can be measured by the fact that the family has now put together a $100 million fund called Longview, which will be dedicated. Now, this is strictly ROI. This is strictly financially driven money. Will be to follow on in investments in Broadview portfolio companies. So because we know the companies, we're working with them, we know who's good, we know the teams that are good, the teams we don't want to back any further, but the ones we definitely want to back, where there is a good progress that's being made. And Longview comes in as a follow-on as long as there is a new independent investor coming in with the term sheet. So we invest across the US and Europe. We've got several companies in Europe, France, Ireland, Copenhagen, Finland. Continue to look for more some. So if you hear of anything in cardiometabolic or stroke, we'd love to hear about it. But that's who Broadview is.
Thank you very much, Christopher, for the introduction. Let's jump back from the United States to Europe. It's a fund that is based in the Scandinavics, but also in Austria. It's Hardian Ventures. Welcome, Walter Stockinger, to our panel discussion. And lately you have been in the news with a very quick exit. Can you please tell us a little bit more about your fund?
Thank you, Christian, for the invitation and for the introduction. Indeed, we are a classic life science VC located in Europe, headquartered in Oslo, but focusing on most regions in Europe. The principle or the premise on which Hardian was formed was also very simple. It was the understanding that there's excellent science being conducted in Europe, yet if you look at the capital markets and the availability of capital for startups, in particular in certain regions of Europe, it doesn't compare, it doesn't match up to the United States, for example. And not only is there plenty of opportunity to invest the capital for a life science VC investor, there's also the desire from less sophisticated investors, large pension funds, from wealthy individuals and the likes to invest into the space, yet knowing that they cannot make qualified investment decisions. So they need a VC specialist VC like us to deploy their money into that industry. I guess, yeah, that's all I can say to Hadean Ventures. Christian, you mentioned an exit that we recently had. It was indeed a company located in Austria, Tennis. I think it's been in the news now. We closed last Friday. An excellent team, and I think I don't have to say too much to it. Most people who are listening to this podcast probably know Tennis very well.
Thank you, Walter, for your introduction. We have heard in the keynote a lot about the stock market and IPO, and I'm very happy to have Henriette Lininger today in our panel discussion as a representative of the Austrian stock market. Could you please tell us a little bit about the role a stock market can play for life science entrepreneurs and investors?
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Christian, for inviting me to your most interesting panel. So maybe I just introduce a little bit the Vienna Stock Exchange, if I may. I've been working for the exchange since 2005. And Vienna Stock Exchange is a privately owned exchange owned by its listed companies and Austrian banks. I just would like to add it because this is a very often posed question. We are fully fledged EU-regulated stock exchange, and I think two things are characterizing the Vienna Stock Exchange. First of all, we drive a very broad Central Eastern European network, and we are an infrastructure provider for trading to these markets. So we act as a gate to this region, as we have a typical or untypical investor breakdown here in Austria. So investors trading on Vienna Stock Exchange are mainly domiciled abroad. So US investor base is the #1 ranked country for international investors in Austrian market. Then Austria is #2 and the UK is #3. So I just wanted to mention that beforehand. So what we can do, what is the role of a stock exchange? First of all, it's supporting highly efficient trading, transparent trading, and posing shares. That's the key function of stock exchange. So it applies also to Vienna Stock Exchange. And I guess the second element is more economic one. So as a stock exchange, you support companies for funding. And I would like to say that, I guess, of course, in our opinion, there's no other way of financing where you get three things in that extension. So it's enormous funding if you need, and it's visibility, and it's sort of a good structure and governance, like Andreas Grassauer mentioned beforehand. So as a stock exchange, you always contribute to a good value-added chain for every country's economy. So I think that's, in a nutshell, is the function of the role of a stock exchange.
Thank you very much for the introduction. When we talk about investment processes, I very often perceive the expectations that you send a pitch deck to an investor, and within 2 weeks you have the money on a bank account. What I'm interested in, and I would like to discuss this also with the other panelists, is that really the reality? Does it work that fast so that you only push a deck and the investor is happy to receive it and engages immediately? Sarah, what's your process at Roivant? How do you handle that?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it doesn't take 2 weeks. I wish, and it doesn't take 2 weeks, I think, for the good reasons, for good, valid reasons. First and foremost, we spent a lot of time getting to know the team. If there's a team, sometimes we do pharma spin-offs, so usually there's no team. But I think, it is important, whether it's venture, whether it's Roivant, people are what makes the business. And I think I have yet to meet any investor that would not do diligence and would not want to have an active role in the company building. Previously, it was at Sofinova, now at Roivant. Usually lead investors go in, wanted to build a company, and that means thinking about, what the company has today, where the company wants to go. And, when it comes to strategy, there are so many questions that need to be discussed. And we do that pre-investment. Pre-investment, we go talk to the company about the team, the asset, additional assets to the company, syndication, globalization, and anything from, the IP council, accounting, where the company is located. And the details are important for us. And I think we do want to discuss that with the team pre-investment. And many companies that we see want the capital, but are arm's length. And I've never seen that. I mean, I think companies would in general, what I would encourage companies, fundraising, that they first of all look inwards and sort of think about what type of investors, what type of capital. There's a lot of capital around. That's undeniable. And VC and Roivant provide a certain type of capital. But I think, when some companies come to Roivant, for example, and they ask for, 30, 40, 50 million, but they still want arm's length relationship, that doesn't work. We are pretty hands-on in the company building, pre-investment, post-investment, whether it's Asia presence, US presence, putting more compounds in the pipeline, changing indication, just strengthening management teams. And I think some teams are pretty naive about how much Roivant is involved in that process. And we see it, I see it very quickly at the diligence level. If they become very, very picky with the CDAs and sharing information, then I ask the question, are you sure that Roivant is for you? Are you sure that you want venture money? Because there's other types of capital, other types of pools of capital. Are you sure that you share the same ambition that we share? Because not all investors are the same. And if you think about, we do take companies public very often on the Nasdaq exchange. Would we take them public in Europe? Probably not. So we have to have those discussions, and those take a long time. So for us, between the time that we see an asset, a company, to closing, it might take 6 months, 9 months. Now, it is also dependent on how easy the company makes it, with us. If they are not ready sharing information, they're just difficult, then it's a longer process, or we might as well stop. Because I think what companies need to realize is that every investor, we have a pipeline of companies that we're looking at for an investment. So a given company is competing for capital from other companies that are pitching to the investment committee, at the same time. So, sometimes it's not just convincing one partner, but I have to convince my partners in New York and in Europe. So it is a long process, because sometimes internally people don't see the company the same way as I would do. And it takes time to convince them internally. But again, I would probably spend the most time not on doing diligence on the compound. That is pretty straightforward. Most of the companies that I look at are early, so they don't have a lot of data. So I don't spend most of my time there. There's always one more experiment they could do. There's always, something else they could have done. Fine. I mean, I'm happy with taking risks. This is what we do for a living. I think where I spend most of my time and why it takes so long to close deals is aligning, as Andrea said before in the opening, aligning and being coherent. How do you want to build your company? Is this the way we see, because this is going to be a long road. We're not in for 4 years, 5 years. We're in the long road to profitability, possibly. But if you don't want to be the CEO for the long run, if some of the companies say, I only want to be the CEO for 2 years, I want to take the company public and I leave. So for me and for the team, most of the time is spent on really understanding the intention, the ambition, the purpose, and how we would build it together. And I see that many teams want to, get over those discussions and just put the money in. And it doesn't do any favor, because, maybe we can do an investment faster, but we're going to have the discussions later. And it's better to have them before the investment than after the investment. It's better to discuss whether the existing management team, it is going to be the management team before investment than after investment. So that's a little bit how we structure investment decisions.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Astrid, one question to you in regard to investments. Let's stretch the question initially a little bit. ICOs, I think, is the right term. I have to admit, I really don't understand blockchain entirely up to now. Can you speed up the process with blockchain or Bitcoin for investments? How does it work?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think ICOs are, I can safely say, pretty much over. So I wouldn't recommend anyone who is trying to conduct an ICO these days to actually go for that. Yes, you can raise a lot of capital by going into private rounds. And then you have to be careful, and investors who are working in the space are looking very carefully if you are really working alongside of a utility token, or if it could be classified as a security and is actually in the class of a security token. Because that also is, on a regulatory kind of point, a very important distinction. And we have seen many cases where people have done this in the wrong way and are facing now multi-billion-dollar lawsuits because the SEC in the US has suddenly classified them as a security. So it's very important to engage very early in this process. We have also seen that this is actually a space that is super interdisciplinary. So it's not enough to just be a startup crowd and super technical. So like we're gonna build the next kind of thing. You really need to be careful about your business model. How do you actually create value in your token? What is the token engineering behind it? What is your whole cryptocurrency economy, so to say, behind it? What are the identifiers there? And we have also seen that actually one shouldn't forget this. Another term for token is also digital asset. So this means it is a sort of asset class. And this means you actually need a lot of asset management experience for that as well. So you can already see that building up a very successful team, or actually even marginally successful team in this space, requires a lot of technical expertise from different kind of areas, and it's easy to get it wrong. So my advice would also be for anyone, who is now, for example, in the healthcare space or another kind of space and works in what I call the Web 2 ecosystem, so being built on traditional technology, is to first have a really good understanding of what level of technology do I really need? Is it something that I really need to build from scratch? Because this is something that investors will look for today. There are a lot of platforms already. There are a lot of technology that you could use off the shelf, so to say. And there's no need to build another blockchain yourself, because you need to consider the token engineering aspect, the governance aspect. So how do you actually go about these kind of things? How to make it secure? And there's no point in just trying to promise in a white paper, oh, I'm going to have the next, I don't know, whatever, next Ethereum or next Bitcoin or Polkadot or whatever, if you can't really deliver on it. So there is something about it that this is a bleeding edge technology area, and it is, if you're not quite, let's say, aware of how much it actually needs to get something like this to the market, or even marginally useful, it's really better to keep your hands off it.
Thank you, Astrid. Christoph, I would like to build on your introduction. You mentioned that your fund is philanthropic, and I would like to pick up also the question from David Wurm. Is there a list of documents, infos that the VC generally wants to have? How does that work with a philanthropic investor? You're just a nice guy with the money who is throwing the money around, or do you have expectations and processes running?
Oh no, we're very nice, and we can transfer money in 24 hours. That's not a problem. The challenge, however, is getting to that transfer and all the paperwork that goes towards getting the transfer approved. No, I mean is there a set of slides? We see all sorts of slides, but the one that I would say do not do is spend 20 slides talking about the market and how much people sold their companies in the past, because past acquisitions are no indication of future deal value. But talk about how you're going to really affect the patient. Who are these patients? And what is your technology? I've seen slide decks that are 25 slides of all sorts of stuff, and then one slide on what the technology is all about, right? So, I think most VCs sort of know the space that they're working in. They get it really quickly. And so, an introductory slide about a deck, about 15 slides. Who are you? Who's your team? Very important, right? We you can have very good technology, but if it's not the right team, it's not going anywhere. Who are your advisors? I think that talks a lot about who you are, who you're networked into, who's advising you. What's your technology? What's your development plan? How much you're raising, and what that money is, what milestone that money is going to take you to. that's really the key set of data that we need. Because understand, we've been doing this for 10 years, 12, 11 years now. We know the entire competitive landscape better than any company does, because we've seen everything that's out of there, what's public and what's not public. We know who you're competing with and how you're going to be competing with them. And so, we don't need to be educated on the cardiovascular aspect of it, but we do need to understand the technology. The process is pretty simple. We have a two-step process. We have our advisory board meeting 3 times a year. At least that's how it was before COVID. We're sort of in transition now. That's when we take 3 companies to the advisory board. This is a clinical scientific board. So it's really the culmination of, or the end of clinical and scientific diligence. And once they get past that, then we go into the financial diligence. We look at the budgets, etc. And then it just depends, because now we are happy to, if you twist our arm a little bit, we will be happy to lead around. So if you need 5 million to get to the real milestone, well, let's go raise 5 million. And then it just depends on how long it takes to raise that 5 million and how quickly we can do it. We've done it, and as I said, one company came in when they heard we were going to make an investment and decided to take the entire round and put a term sheet on the table. And so that closed in 2 weeks. But most often time, it takes a couple of months, and if we're successful. But I think the key, and I think Sarah hit it on the head. I mean, the technology is great, but we also look at the team. We look at the development plan. Remember, we're early stage investors, so even though it might be really, really interesting science, make huge impact on patients, but their next round they have to raise 50 million in cardiovascular. Highly unlikely that that's going to happen. So we probably wouldn't invest over there. So we're looking at various components, how much do they need to get to a milestone? What is the probability of someone coming in after that milestone to take it forward? What are your sort of exits? And, if it's only pharma, is that a good idea? Because relying on pharma is probably not the best business plan on the market today. But having an IPO is a good way, because now you have an option. If we're looking at a company, one of our companies looking at going IPO, highly unlikely we'll go, but it's an option. And so, if pharma comes in and says, we want to do a partnership, we can still do a partnership. We can still raise, but having that IPO as a goal, an exitable goal, I think is a good disciplined approach for the team to go after. So we're no different, even though we're philanthropic, we're no different from other investors. We do a lot of diligence. We talk to a lot of KOLs. As you can imagine, we can pick up the phone and call any cardiologist today. And then the team itself knows a lot about what's out of there in cardiovascular. So for me, that's really the strength of Broadview, because we're very focused. We know exactly what's going on in the field.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Walter, one question to you. We heard a lot about IPO partnerships with the pharmaceutical industry. What's your opinion as Hardian Ventures? Is it an either-or decision to whether list the company on the stock market or sell it to a pharma company, or is it a combination? How do you handle that at Hardian Ventures when it comes to exit?
Yeah, Christian, I have to make sure I'm not stepping on anybody's toes here, but I quoting somebody else, maybe that gets me out of that situation. Somebody who taught me venture capital, and they said real VCs make M&As. The reason for that being, like Andreas already said earlier, rarely an IPO is an exit. An IPO typically is a way to attract money, but at the same time put the company in a situation where the access to money will be limited in the future. And that can be seen very well on a number of companies in Sweden or Nordic First, which maybe I can say a few words later on. In principle, what investors need from a stock market, what professional investors need from a stock market to be a sensible and reasonable way forward is liquidity. Liquidity during the IPO and liquidity afterwards, to being able to sell the shares that you own of the company that you IPO'd. Because Andreas said it earlier, for us, we are not, for most venture capital investors, most professional fund investors have closed-end funds. They need to return the capital that they are managing at some point to the people they got the capital from. Hence, they have a strong interest of selling their shares at some point. Obviously, they don't want to destroy the value of the company by doing so. And for that, they need a really liquid market. And if you look at the European environment, I've just, some of the numbers that I'm going to give you are my estimates. Some of them are actual numbers. How many biotech IPOs have there happened in Europe over the last couple of years? I think somebody who knows the London AIM market very well said Shield Therapeutic was the last biotech IPO in a long time. That was 2016. Euronext, I think, has two or three IPOs in biotech this year. Austria, I think, had 2 biotech IPOs in 20 years. Now, if you look at the United States, at NASDAQ, they had 75 in 2019 alone. And you see the numbers, even if you compare if you adjust to the size of the country, it doesn't even compare. You do have the liquidity in the United States. And I think for the stock exchanges in Europe to be competitive as a route for IPO, as a route for, as an interesting route for attracting capital into a startup, then they really need to look into how to work together, how to build an environment where professional investors, hedge funds, biotech hedge funds become viable to invest on such a stock exchange. Only at that point, I think European Stock Exchange will be a first go-to choice for professional investors like us.
Thank you, Walter, for your points. Henriette, one question to you as a representative of the Austrian stock market. What's your opinion? Why should a company float on the stock exchange?
Christian, now I have a problem because I would like to answer on the last statement. So should I do that before or?
Sure, go ahead, answer it.
Okay, because I'm sure, I mean, it's clear I have to take this point now. I mean, what we do, to be honest, as a stock exchange, we also, of course, we know what's going on the biotech or life science sector when it comes to an IPO. And what we did is we had a closer look on all the listings in Europe and the cross-border listings on NASDAQ. So because that's the basis we have to compare. And I mean, this 2019, you're totally right. There went 3 bigger European biotechs on NASDAQ. And they're doing quite well there in sense of performance and in sense of trading liquidity. But when you have a closer look on all the other cross-border listings, and we also had 2 Austrian companies relocated to or moved to the US and listed on NASDAQ. That's not such a success story like, for example, Marinomed did in Austria. And this is also true for all the others. So about 75 to 80% of all the European cross-border listings on NASDAQ are not having this great performance like BioNTech has or Centrogene or whatsoever. And that's the first thing. And when it comes to liquidity, to trading liquidity, we also had a closer look on that. And if you see the figures on NASDAQ, you have always to compare the same basis. The liquidity on NASDAQ is counted by every trading venue around the US. If you do that on Europe, you don't do that. You just count one stock exchange and the other stock exchange. But if you would add this, it's the minimum, the same liquidity you can get in Europe, because here also companies are listed on the stock market and on different other trading venues, additional, like in the US. So this is just something. So if somebody wants to have a sort of an analysis, we are happy to do that. So that's one of our jobs. So please come and just drop me an email. We would like to do that. So that was the first statement, Christian. What was your question, by the way? I forget. Sorry.
The question was maybe in addition, why should, in your opinion, a company float on the stock exchange? What are the pros and cons that you can give a company?
I think I just summarize the statements of my co-panelists, and I think first of all it's funding. If you don't have a funding need, you just get your shares traded. Why should they get traded? Because investors want to have a valuation, a daily valuation, want to be traded. And for this use case, we implemented a new market segment in 2019, which is an easy market and a very low budget capital market access for younger companies. It is called direct market plus. So so you want to raise money, you want to exit money because investors want to have an exit. So it's quite a big number in Austria of Austrian listings are venture capital exits. Or private equity exits, partial or full exits, depending. So we have the function of also an exit path for investors, for life science and non-life science. I mean, this is one industry, a special industry, but when it comes to stock exchange, it's more or less the same. And so if you do that, if you go public, you are in the limelight of the public. You have new intermediaries like the analysts, the investment banks, the investors, and some of our younger companies also told us that it's great to be in the stock exchange. I guess so much awareness I never had before, and they never expected. And what they do is they get a better network of business partners as well, of better or well-knowledge supervisory board members, things like that. So I think the transparency, for us, it's a pro, and it's a con. So if you don't want to be transparent, if you don't want to be in the limelight, if you don't want to have regulated reporting, if you don't want to have IFRS, if you're in the segment for IFRS, then you should not do that. IPO is not an instrument for every company. So I think that's clear. It must be a fit. And on top, what I like most is you can participate your employers on your company's success. So this is, and if you want to have a new currency in regards of taking over companies, so we have an acquisition currency defined by having shares public listed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to pick up a question from the audience. It's from Maria Lamotke, Picol Limited Company in Munich. The investor is bringing in funds into the company. What else can the investor offer to the company to support it? Is it connections or is it really only money? I would like to ask this question to the entire panel. Who would like to pick it up? Christopher, go ahead.
So I would say that our team spends over 60% of their time working with the company. The value that we bring, as I said earlier, we know the cardiovascular space really well, so we know what's the best way and help the company develop their program. We can connect them to key opinion leaders, which we're doing all the time, as well as then helping build syndicates, because we now know a lot of investors and a lot of investors know us. And we have this reputation as being the go-to cardiovascular company. So if you're, in fact, I would flip it the other way around and say, if you're looking only for money, probably Broadview is not your best investor. But if you're looking for a partner that will bring in funds, help build the company, take you down the right path, it's never a straight line. There's always ups and downs to help you navigate that. You know, right now I've had to step in and negotiate a license with the university because the team couldn't get it done. So I think money is really maybe 30% of our input into a company.
Thank you very much. Sarah, you had also, I think, something to add, and then Walter.
Yeah. I think I concur with what Christopher said. If you just want capital, there's probably other pots of capital that are lower in cost. I'd say, Royven and other investors, it's the perspective. We're typically invested in many companies. We've seen, we have the pulse on what's going on the ground with many companies, the failures. I mean, the fact that we've built many companies, some of them have crashed, gone into the wall, some of them have been successful. So the experience of many years having seen many companies from idea, be invested, divested, maybe burned on the ground, and the network and the ability to call a KOL, a payer, somebody has sold a number of companies and have them on speed dial and say, okay, talk to my management team, and you have pretty privileged access to our network. Now, this said, I think, and I've seen it with some companies don't want this, which is intriguing. Some companies just want the capital, and it's not that they don't want it, but I don't think the trust has built enough to take the suggestion. Just an example, IP lawyers. Many of the companies that we see, the early stage companies, come with IP counsels that they have done good work, but I think we need to elevate the company, and sophisticate the company a little bit more. And we come with suggestions, could be accounting, IP, could be anything. And we say, listen, we've worked with this lawyer because they have know-how in small molecule or antibody or oncolytic virus. These are the best. And you'd be surprised how many companies just don't want the suggestion or the advice. And I feel that some of them think that if they take your network, your suggestions, then you're taking over the whole company. And that's not the intention. The intention is to communicate to you what has worked for us and what hasn't worked for us, because there's some IP lawyers or whatever it is, or bankers, when you want to take the company public, that, or investors, a good example is investors. There's investors that at least I don't have a good experience with. That doesn't say that I wouldn't work with them, but I like to communicate that to potential companies, because if you raise capital from those companies, they may not behave like they say they behave. So, they might dump your stock the next day after the lockup. So again, it's communicating the experience. But again, many of the companies that I see, it feels like they don't want it. And that's why when I'm doing diligence on a company and I come with suggestions, what about that person for the board, advisory board, globalizing the company, putting on the map, equity story, and I feel like nothing's going in, I question, are we the right match? Because this is the value that we provide. It's not capital. It's I think, as Christopher says, the 70%, which is not capital, that's the value that we provide.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Walter.
Yeah, so startups, especially in the healthcare space, need lots of specialist know-how. And rest assured, the investor you take on board is not going to know the field of science better than you do. He's not going to know the technology better than you do. He's not going to be a regulatory specialist, most likely not a clinical specialist in none of these fields. The investor is ultimately the person with the largest know-how. But what they do have experiences in is through what the stages a company has to go through, and the important elements a company has to achieve to make the next step. And there is nobody else out there than startup investors who has that much experience, because they have seen this in many different companies. So as Sarah said just now, I can only recommend that anybody who is taking on a venture capital investor listens to the advice, considers it, and bears in mind that investors like us, and I can tell you, conversation around our investment team, an investor like us does not like to spend time with the company. Ideally, a company runs by itself. So very often in the last couple months, we have said we cannot invest into this company because it feels at this point that we have to invest too much time into this one, not another one like that. So investors who get involved, they do this because they really think that involvement increases the chance that the company will be a success, which ultimately should be in the interest of all the shareholders, and in particular of the founders who mostly have a large stake in the company.
Thank you very much, Walter. We got a lot of blockchain-related questions, and I would like to pick one up from Irene Fielka. She runs INITS and Health Hub Vienna. It's a Vienna-based acceleration and incubation program. You should have a look at it later after the panel discussion. And maybe I start with Astrid to also get these questions answered. The question is, do you see a direct relation between value created by a token versus token price in health in particular?
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the question, Irene. So I think the issue is at the moment, so what people really have to consider is that the whole blockchain, token engineering, and token economy fields are very young fields. So this means that a lot of things have still to be figured out in how you actually set up a token ecosystem where you will have a direct link between value creation of an application or an infrastructure versus your token price. So what we have seen so far is, for example, if you look at Bitcoin, and Bitcoin has no inherent value if you look at it. So it is, is one of the more better known maybe blockchains out there. Some people coin it the digital gold or stuff, but it actually has no real value. No one will, for example, wait for a block confirmation time of 40 minutes just when he wants to pay with a credit card. So this is actually quite useless. So it is just a kind of function over time that people have heard about it lots, and there you go, you have some sort of value in there. I think this will change now over time. So I think that this field is also maturing and is professionalizing. And as I mentioned before, it has become to realize that experience in asset management. So also if you put a token on an exchange, and that you have to consider things like market making, so providing liquidity for such a token, that you will see that over time, there will be now more and more cases where people can actually really put a sensible price, or a price that will actually reflect the value of a blockchain behind it. But it is something where there are just a few opportunities out there at the moment that really do that. And a lot of it is just pure speculation. So that's at least the kind of view that we have on that.
Thank you very much, Astrid. I would like to pick up another question from Sara Inkinen. How could tech transfer professional in research organizations support and guide early stage startups that are in the pre-seed phase in order for the startups to have the best starting point for raising investments later on? What are the expectations of investors? What should be prepared?
This is for me?
Sarah, go ahead if you would like to start. It's for the entire panel.
Please, go ahead.
Who would like to, Sarah? Just start.
I mean, I just, I can be very brief.
Yeah.
And they play a huge role in translating science into companies, into compounds that can treat patients. I think there has been a change in the last 10 years, but there's some countries that are still lagging behind. TTOs don't have the right incentives to actually translate anything. And and again, I will not name countries, not to be controversial, but I think we have to do more. And I think just an anecdote, I've been hung up on the phone a couple of times, by just professors that with the TTO next to them, they just don't accept the questions or the diligence. And you wonder, they've never talked to an investor, okay, fine, but the TTO has a big role in educating, what that process of talking to an investor, to making a company together, to driving the compound to the clinic, what that would look like. And I feel like sometimes I'm going into these calls with a negativity. Investors are, especially in Europe, investors are, they want to take control and they're going to ruin everything. I'm going to keep 90% of the company forever. And I feel like that is not the reality. And the TTOs should screen, educate, pre-discussion, what it is working with venture. And I think we spend a lot of time going to universities and TTOs you'd be surprised. Sometimes I get on the phone with a professor and I feel that the intention is to do something together. I present Roivant and it's just a wall. And you feel like, we don't have to talk, but I think if you are coming to us, there must be sort of an understanding of what is it working with venture, with investors. And I feel they play a huge role with negotiating licenses. The same, some of these agreements, they come redlined and it's pretty much obscene, what they want. They want the capital and an arm's length and don't bother us, no governance, no board meetings. And like, and some of them actually quite sophisticated, but they bend over backwards, to please the professor, and that cannot be. So again, it's finding that way of working together. I think they play a huge role, and I think some countries have stepped it up so much, and then they're starting to see the results very positively. But again, I mean, this was meant to be a positive note, but I'd like to hear my co-panelists' views.
Yeah, if I can add to that, just because, my background was in technology transfer before, and I think I totally agree with Sarah that it really depends a little bit on the country, and there are some countries that are actually already very well experienced and have had exposure to many technology transfer projects, and some are really just at the beginning, one can say. And I think what also especially the younger tech transfer offices need to see is sort of, okay, what are terms that an investor can actually really live with? So if you see, for example, IP agreements in medical technologies with 20-30% royalty rates, you will say like, well, there's no way you can ever bring this to market because you suddenly have to increase the margin by so much that it's totally unreasonable. So who would ever invest in something like that if that's already something that starts off? So there is a lot of, in the legal details where technology transfer officers can get it wrong and already kill off a project very early on, and especially if they're not open to discussing these points also in connection with investors. But it's also, I think, depending on what kind of support you give them. So, example, for us at Oxford University, we've been actually very, very helpful in trying to put in, first pitches, really revise the business plans over and over again. So actually the teams were actually really well set up. It was always also a principle of ours to say, okay, the founders, the scientists actually need to sort of do their own work or homework behind it as well, because there's no way if you want to push it for the scientists, even if you recognize this is a really great, life-changing technology, if the scientific team is sort of not even available on call, and if you're then trying to get first meetings with investors, that they wouldn't be even happy to pitch alongside their CEO or be later on involved in an advisory role. So I think there are many pieces of a puzzle that need to actually come together. But I think one very successful story that people actually can look at is, for example, Night Star Therapeutics of Oxford University, where it has been incredible that in a number of few years, this was actually spun out of the university, turned in a very young venture, IPO'd within a matter of like 3-5 years, and then actually got even acquired by a big pharmaceutical company. This is an exceptional case, for example, but it is something I think that people it's worth aspiring to and try to take actually best practices from these kind of success stories.
Thank you very much, Astrid. Walter, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think we all have to learn, right? Life science we see in Europe is probably not older than 20 years with very few exceptions. I think if you want me to analyze it, the reason why sometimes life science investors, professional life science investors and TTOs are not fully aligned is probably because they don't have the same strategic objectives. The structure of a TTO is built to achieve something, and hopefully it is really designed to achieve that goal. And if that's not the same, like spinning out something, right? Then it will not match well with a life science VC investor who is not interested in probably in a structure that is more designed towards licensing to a big pharmaceutical company. So in short, I think like any other company, like any other institution, a TTO needs to look at what am I trying to achieve, and looking for best practices out there for the best in their field. What do they do to achieve that? And I just think historically, I've experienced that, the one, occurrence where I can say I really felt like the TTO was not incentivized to do the same thing we are trying to achieve, is when the TTO was actually more like a patent office for the university, rather than, an institution that helps, science that comes out of the university to be spun out into startups. It was just a different objective of the institutions. And if that's the case, then of course these institutions will not work well together. And of course, like every other institution, as I said before, we should look at who does it best and learn from those.
Yeah, this is not a country by country issue, right? We have this across the country here in the US too. And what I would simply say to keep this short and sweet, the role of the TTO is to be the translator. Having been a scientist, we scientists speak in a very different language than investors do. And the TTO's role is to translate between the two parties, to understand what the faculty member is providing, is it translatable, etc., and then to see if that can translate into the needs of the investor community and find some common ground of that. And I think if a TTO does that well and understands that this has to be a symbiotic relationship, not a parasitic relationship, which is how a lot of TTOs approach this, it's not going to work. So if you want to be a good TTO, be a translator.
Thank you very much. TTO is a good point. Early stage investments and then they hand over to the VCs. In the last years, there was a lot of innovation on the market. Token is one thing, but there's another one. It's called crowdfunding, like Seeders. It's a question raised by an attendee, and it's by Bikram Pandey. And how do investors, life science VCs, view crowdfunding suitable for life science? Walter, go ahead.
So I'm not sure if so I read the question in the chat, right? I felt like the question was like, how can I make money using Seeders? I guess this was probably Bikram's interest here. And, I can only say, I recommend nobody to privately invest in life science unless that person does have experience in doing so. It is a highly complicated, highly regulated market, and one can be very easily drawn into an idea that, without your knowledge has been tried 25 times before, or for whatever illogical reason is not going to work, or presumably logical reason is not going to work, that you do not understand. So my recommendation is, unless you want to do good deed to people that you know well and that you trust and you have a personal relationship, you most likely, in the terms of investment theory, you most likely have less alpha than the professional investors in the area.
Thank you, Walter. Sarah, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why somebody, the mom and pop would want to invest in a very risky binary asset class. I think if you want you can have a very good return, pretty steady in other asset classes. You can. So unless you have a relationship with a company, I wouldn't recommend it. From an investor standpoint, we want to have simplified, simple, straightforward cap tables. I do not like to see, and again, I think you can bundle them sometimes in a one vehicle, but I think as an investor, I like to have people in the company as shareholders that understand, that align on the vision and the ambition and the potential exit of the company. Sometimes if you have over 200 investors, you are behaving like a semi-public entity. So again, I don't like it. I've invested in one, and it wasn't really crowded, but it was like a lot of friends in the company, and it wasn't easy. Because again, people don't understand the business, they don't have the time, they don't read the documents, they don't sign in time, and it wasn't easy. So again, I like to have a simplified cap table and board as possible.
Thank you, Sarah. One question to Henriette. Henriette, how do you see such novel instruments like crowdfunding, tokens? How helpful are they for investors, in the opinion of the stock exchange?
We, in fact, we like every financing possibilities pre-IPO whatsoever, and also the crowd. So with our direct network, we implemented a sort of network for funding partners, helping us with smaller companies. We have so many companies showing up, sending their pitch decks if they have one. So that's one answer to the previous question. Sometimes they don't know what is a pitch deck, and they are far away from any IPO process or only listing process, or yeah. So what we do then is we have a network of VCs, of crowdfunding platforms, of business angels whatsoever, and we handle them over to them. So to answer your question, or to answer the question, it's a very important source. So every financing possibility for entrepreneurs is an important source, and so we like that. Of course, we like that. And the second one was the token issue, I guess, right? Because I can't see the question.
Yes. The question was, how do you as a stock exchange view token investments?
I think Astrid already mentioned, this is a new asset class. It's digital asset. We, from a stock exchange perspective, we monitor these developments closely. When it comes to technology, Vienna Stock Exchange, we will not be the innovator of some new technologies, but we will be a very smart follower if it comes up on the market. So there are some regulations still missing to get a real securitization of securitized tokens. But from a real personal perspective, to make investments possible to a crowd via an IPO, via crowdfunding, via whatsoever, understandable. And I totally understand that life science and biotech especially is a binary industry, but it's hopefully not in every case the same, but I think it's a highly democratic process. Why should not we let people, beside big investors, at least when they are mature enough, do invest and participate in one of the most crucial industries we will see in the next decades? So that's it. That was my answer.
Thank you very much. We are coming to the end of the panel discussion, and I would like to ask one final question to the panelists. When you can give only one advice to life science entrepreneurs, how they can improve how they approach their investors, what advice would that be?
So if I can say something to that, because I think it ties also nicely into the discussion that we had previously, is also to do actually due diligence on your investor as well. So it's not just that, providing all these lovely materials and all that and trying to get some money out of investors, but really check out the investor, make sure that it's a real good fit, that you can get actually some kind of good connection out of this. And also ask for introductions to portfolio companies. Ask how, this investor has approached other, investments before. So I think that is also something that is very crucial and should be taken into account when you approach a VC, because on the one hand, it will give you the answer, is this VC really for me? But it will also give you some kind of comfort level in saying like, okay, this is really a helpful investor, and it's not just another name that you add to some sort of list, like is often the case with advisory reports, to be honest. So make real use of the network technologies that we have today.
Thank you, Astrid. Walter, what is your advice?
Assume that the investor is on your side. Assuming from my end here that what the founder wants is to create value. So if you want to create value for yourself, if that is your ultimate objective, I think you can assume that an investor is going to be on your side, not at the other side.
Thank you, Sarah.
I think, Astrid and Walter have summarized very well. I think for me, it's just before you reach out to any type of capital, to define with your team what is it that you really want. How do you want to build the company, the team, the strategy, the ambition, and communicate that clearly, and be prepared to be flexible and to listen. I think Walter and Astrid already summarized very well. I concur.
Thank you very much, Christopher.
I would say, based on my training in pharma, think backwards, not forwards, but think backwards. You have a great idea. Just because it's a great idea doesn't mean it's translatable, doesn't mean there is a need in the market. So think backwards and go all the way to the end and say, if this develops into a product, who is it going to serve? Who is going to prescribe it? Who is going to pay for it? Is there really a need? And what is this product going to look like? Because that will then tell you what your development plan needs to look like in terms of phase 3 and then phase 2 and phase 1 and where you are. And we'll give you a good sense of how that product needs to develop from idea to market and who it's going to serve. So before you go to investors, I think it's incumbent on you to go out and talk to people and get some feedback. And you'll get a lot of you ask 12 people, you get 13 opinions. That's fine. But if you come to an investor with your story well analyzed and going from start to finish and where exactly you're going to reach in terms of adding value, how that product's going to add value to the market and therefore to the investor, because no market, no return. I think that gives you some level of credibility with the investor.
Thank you very much. Henriette, what is your advice when a scientist says, my end goal is to go public? What should they think about?
I think I would invite him first in one of our great workshops in regards of getting know-how in a process of an IPO. We do that together with international and national investment banks to learn about the process and what is it about, what are the main success drivers and not success drivers. So I would do that. And before that, we would do some individual talks. And I would ask Andreas Grasauer if he could also have a chat with the respective company.
Andreas, are you still there?
Yeah, definitely. I'm there.
What's your advice to the entrepreneurs?
The advice to the entrepreneurs is you could surprise the investors with the know-how that every real transformative technology or compound really changes the industry, at least dies 3 times during development. If you want to look at how this happens, there's a book out there from Safi Bakal called Loon Shots, published last year, that pretty well summarizes what happened, for example, to compounds like statins or other things. And if you come up to those investors with an approach how you and your company and especially your team is going to overcome those 3 deaths that will occur to your technology and to those difficulties, you're going to be well perceived and investors will like you.
Thank you very much to you all for your time. We are at the end of the panel discussion. Have a great time, stay safe, and we see us next time.
Thanks, Christian.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please share the podcast and make sure you've subscribed. Have a great day.